All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, just taking this time out to recap some of the things that went on this past weekend at the NFL draft. And I know I talked about some of the things right at the conclusion of the draft, and just want to go into a little more detail right now. Some of the surprises that we saw throughout this draft process. One of the biggest surprises throughout this draft, Georgia linebacker N'Kobe Dean, having to wait all the way to the midway point of the third round of this draft before he heard his name called. That's a scenario where a lot of us did not expect. But with that said, I think that we are going to see a very motivated Dean come into play for this upcoming season for the Philadelphia Eagles. I know that there were a lot of skeptics that looked at his size at 5'11", and his weight. He came in just under 230 pounds. But the bottom line is this guy can play. And for me, it's one of those, you think about some of the great under quote unquote undersized linebackers that have gone on to have tremendous careers in the NFL, most notably Mike Singletary and Sam Mills. You also think about London Fletcher, another gentleman who was slight of stature but made a big time impact at the middle linebacker position. And then just a guy who was very coveted on a free agency front this year. And I'm talking about Bobby Wagner, who, after being released by the Seattle Seahawks, made his way to the Los Angeles Rams. So, nonetheless, I think that N'Kobe Dean going in the third round of this draft is probably the steal of this entire draft process. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Philadelphia Eagles find a way to utilize him. The quarterbacks, I'm really not surprised with how things worked out. It's a situation where, you know what, hey, I expected one quarterback to go in round number one, and we saw that. We had that with Kenny Pickett going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then from there, it was a situation where Malik Willis fell into the third round for the Tennessee Titans. Not surprised there because he was a project. We saw Sam Howell have to wait to the fifth round before the Washington Commanders selected him. Another surprise for me that that really wasn't there. If you focus on the first round of this draft was all about offensive tackles, wide receivers, and it was also about edge rushers. And we saw that early with the likes of Kayvon Thibodeau going fifth overall to the Giants. Guys who can have an impact in getting to that football. Also, guys who can protect the blind side of a quarterback. We saw Charles Cross go to Carolina, sixth overall. We saw Evan Neal go to the New York Giants, seventh overall. Pardon me, excuse me. Charles Cross went ninth overall to Seattle. Ikem Ekwano went sixth overall to Carolina. Forgive me for that. But nonetheless, we saw the focus that so many teams are putting on protecting their quarterbacks. And we also saw the focus that so many teams are putting on being able to rush the passer. This is what led the New York Jets the trade back into the first round late in the proceedings to take Jermaine Johnson out of Florida State because especially on the AFC side, and I've talked about this before in previous podcasts, that if you are going to be able to go out there and win in the postseason, you have to find a way to rush the passer. And if you cannot rush the passer, plain and simple, you are not going to win. That's it. We've seen it in the offseason. We saw the Chargers go out there and acquire Khalil Mack. We saw the Raiders pick up Chandler Jones. We saw the Bills pick up Von Miller. And then, of course, that theme still resonated in these draft proceedings. If you cannot get to the quarterback, you're going to have a problem. And you're dealing with so many quality quarterbacks out there, especially on the AFC side. That is why, a lot of teams I really think focused on that in this draft. And I'm joined right now by Dennis Ward. Coach Ward, how you doing? I was just talking about, how a lot of teams focused on getting those edge rushers uh, early on in this draft, and also how teams focused on protecting the blind side of their quarterbacks.
It just happened to be that the positions of need were positions of strength in this draft in certain instances. And I think it worked out well for quite a few teams. It was a lot of talented big guys. This was a big guys draft. Um, if I'm not mistaken, no running backs in the first round, wide receivers and linemen. That's what you saw. One quarterback, that's it. I think maybe two safeties. So, we are in the era of when everybody's realizing, man, that the real stars of football are the big guys.
Yeah, listen, if you don't have a line, you're not going to win if you cannot protect your quarterback. I don't care how much talent that you have at the skill positions. If you cannot protect your guys, plain and simple, you are not going to win in this game. And then, of course, like I just alluded to, if you cannot rush the passer, you are going to have a problem in winning. And I mean, we saw this, and I just want to hit on this once again. We saw this during the offseason. We saw Khalil Mack get traded to the Chargers. We saw Chandler Jones go to the Las Vegas Raiders. We saw the Buffalo Bills spend a lot of money to get Von Miller in free agency. So if you don't have that ability to rush that passer, you're not going to win as well, especially with so many quality quarterbacks on the AFC side. It makes a big difference in having that guy. One thing I just alluded to start off, and I want to get your opinion on this. Nakobe Dean going midway through the third round. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's just a matter of teams valuing the measurables over the player. The kid Quay Walker that went in the first round to the Green Bay Packers is not a better football player than Nakobe Dean. It's just plain and simple. He's just not a better football player than Nakobe Dean. Nakobe Dean's a leader. He is a playmaker. And what they looked at was 5'11", 235 or whatever he weighs, instead of watching the film and judging him based on that. Now, I get it. If the kid doesn't have the measurables and the tape, you don't take him in the first round. Okay, take him in the second round. I don't have a problem with that. He's at the very minimum a second round player. I'm still confused as to why the Packers took the kid that played with him, again, Quay Walker, instead of over even Devin Lloyd, whose tape is phenomenal. Phenomenal tape, man. That guy is everywhere. He does everything, catches interceptions. But no, Kobe Dean, back to the topic, he's so good, man, so smart, man. And as a football coach for years, you always appreciate those intelligent football players that make your job easier.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it, and I talked about this yesterday on here, and I'm going to talk about it again. You look at first and foremost Nakobe Dean's intangibles, what he brings to the table, the leadership, but also determination, also the speed. I mean, I looked at this kid in that semifinal game when Georgia took on Michigan. And Nakobe Dean ran sideline to sideline consistently. He was all over that field. And if you noticed, that was on the heels of that Georgia defense being embarrassed in the SEC championship game at the hands of Alabama. They came out with a purpose, and Nakobe Dean came out with a purpose, and he was the heartbeat of that defense. He was the leader of that defense. And I talked about it yesterday. I talked about it just before you joined, and I'm going to talk about it again today. It's one of those where sometimes you don't allow common sense to, take over for you. You focus on what the computer is telling you. And I always think back to 1981 when the Dallas Cowboys had an opportunity to draft Mike Singletary, and Mike Singletary wanted to play for the Dallas Cowboys. Mike Singletary went to Baylor. Mike Singletary was from Houston. He was a Texas guy. He wanted to play for the Dallas Cowboys. His coach, his college coach, even recommended him to the Cowboys. But in those days, Tom Landry was focused on what the computer told him as opposed to, using your eyes as a head coach. And by Dallas passing on Mike Singletary, they regretted it. And the reason was they felt that Mike Singletary at 5'11 was an undersized middle linebacker. Mike Singletary was one of the better middle linebackers of all time. You could put him up against anybody from any era. That's how good he was. You think about Sam Mills, another undersized middle linebacker. And of course, he was a part of arguably one of the greatest linebacking corps of all time, the Dome Patrol, with Vaughn Johnson, Pat Swilling, and Ricky Jackson with the New Orleans Saints. Then you think about London Fletcher, what he meant to so many defenses for the Rams, the Bills, and Washington. And then Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner was an undersized linebacker coming out of Utah State. And look at the career that he has gone on to have. So I think, some people, unfortunately, they focus on the size, but at the end of the day, you have to look at it and say, you know what, can this guy play? And more importantly, Nakobe Dean is a leader, and that is something that you alluded to earlier. And I think him falling into the third round is just going to add additional fuel to his fire because you know what? All 32 teams in the NFL passed over that dude at least 2 times. Of course, the Philadelphia Eagles didn't. They finally, got him in round number 3. But I'll tell you like this: I think he's going to have a big impact this season, and also playing behind the big fella that protected him at Georgia and Jordan Davis, who went 13th overall to Philly, and now he's got him in front of him once again, along with Fletcher Cox. So I look at what Philly has in that D line, and I think they're going to be ready to go, and I think Nakobe Dean's going to be ready to go as well.
Single-handedly, those two players can move them up the rankings in terms of run defense. Philadelphia has already put themselves in a position to stop the run right now with those two guys. And I think you are saying the right things. It's going to get a lot tougher in that division. Better players are getting funneled into there. These teams are all bad every year. We didn't get to your team yet. The New York Giants had a great, great, great draft. You want to be able to stop these teams. So you get somebody that's completely unblockable in Jordan Davis, put him next to Fletcher Cox. Now you got a great quarterback of the defense. See, people don't think like this, but defenses need quarterbacks too. They need guys to diagnose the plays and read the offense. And that's what this guy is. I'm still shocked, honestly.
And well, to me, another shocker throughout this draft process, we saw, some wide receivers get traded on draft day for first round picks. We saw Hollywood Brown get shipped by the Baltimore Ravens to the Arizona Cardinals. And I really, to me, I think Baltimore had a phenomenal draft. And I talked about this yesterday. Baltimore and Pittsburgh, you can always pencil them in for having quality drafts because they do a tremendous job of scouting, talent evaluation, and people to fit into their system. And then, of course, the Eagles as well, where they traded and they got A.J. Brown from the Tennessee Titans. But then, the Titans didn't really skip a beat because they went out there and they drafted Treylon Burks, the wide receiver from Arkansas. And I think he can have an impact for them this season. But getting back to Baltimore, they took Kyle Hamilton after Kyle Hamilton fell to them at number 14, but then they came back and got Linderbaum, the center out of Iowa. And I think this guy, he's a stud. I think he has the ability to start from day number 1 for Baltimore. And I think they have an anchor on that offensive line of theirs for the next decade. And it doesn't matter if it's Ozzie Newsome or Matt DaCosta, Baltimore consistently finds a way to get their hands on quality players.
It's kind of sickening how good they are at drafting. You go back and you just look at the list of players they draft, and it's one of the main reasons why you never really see them caught up in too many contract disputes or things like that, because they always got the next person in line. The next guy is in line to do the same exact thing as the guy before them. And they always seem to find a way to get these top safeties and these top defensive backs always fall to them in a draft. It's just amazing that, it's going to.
Looks like Dennis is having some technical difficulty. Dennis, are you there?
Sorry,
Okay.
So yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. And it's really, as someone that appreciates the job of a general manager and the job of a team builder, watching them is a thing of beauty. It really is. Hollywood Brown got a little upset. I think personally, from a standpoint of someone that's just paying attention, I don't think he enjoyed playing with Lamar Jackson, the quarterback, but he loves Lamar Jackson, the person. And he left to play with someone he knew can get him the football. Period. I don't think it was anything personal.
Well, I mean, for me, I think it's a situation where, Baltimore, they won't skip a beat on this. And I mean, because you think about it, since they left Cleveland and they started playing ball in Baltimore in '96, you think about some of the guys, whether it's Ozzie Newsome or Matt DeCosta doing the drafting. And of course, Ozzie Newsome is still there, in a different capacity. But nonetheless, you think about some of the quality players that Baltimore Ravens have drafted in the first round over the years. Jonathan Ogden, and this is just right going off the top of my head. Jonathan Ogden, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Haloti Nada, Terrell Suggs. Okay, we've also seen Lamar Jackson. We've also seen Joe Flacco, Jamal Lewis. All of these guys were first round picks, and obviously more recently with Ronnie Stanley. Now they bring in um, Kyle Hamilton this year. Now they bring in Linderbaum. And I just look at this Baltimore Ravens team. They just do a tremendous job. And like all those players that I mentioned, and of course I'm missing some, but nonetheless, a lot of those guys, if they weren't Hall of Famers, they were still all pro caliber players at their respective positions. And that just gives you an idea, of what they do. And I mean, we've seen coordinators change on both sides of the ball for Baltimore. They've only had three coaches in their existence. It was Ted Marchibroda, Brian Billick, and now of course John Harbaugh. But nonetheless, they know what they're doing. And then of course their rivals in the AFC North and the Pittsburgh Steelers, they continue to do it as well. For me, I thought, when I did my mock draft, I did have Kenny Pickett going to the Steelers at number 20. I felt like he was going to be the only quarterback taken in round number one. I think it's the perfect fit for a variety of reasons. I mean, you look at the Rooneys, Art Rooney, went to his grave and he never forgave his son for passing on Dan Marino back in '83. 39 years later, they come back and get a Pitt quarterback. You figure who knows more about Kenny Pickett than the Pittsburgh Steelers? And to me, I think it's the perfect fit because if you look at the way that the Steelers are constructed, they have a solid defense. On top of that, they run the ball and they have skilled players at the wide receiver position. And you also have a veteran quarterback in place in Mitchell Trubisky. So I do believe that Trubisky will begin this season as a starting quarterback for the Steelers. But nonetheless, at some point, he will make way for Kenny Pickett. It's going to be interesting if the Steelers decide to bring him on at some point this season, or if Trubisky plays solid enough for them that they can just redshirt him basically for the most part this year and bring him in. But nonetheless, I think Kenny Pickett found the perfect spot to play quarterback in the NFL. And for me, that's what it's all about with not just quarterbacks, but with all position players. What fit, what scheme, can be able to maximize what you can do. And I think for Kenny Pickett, he found the perfect spot.
Um, Kenny Pickett, it's funny. I paid attention to him quite a bit. You may not know this. There's a kid that played with him, one of the wide receivers, number 11, Taysir Mack. He's from right here, Brooklyn. Grew up in Canarsie. Went to Grand Street campus, if I'm not mistaken, played there, and was at Indiana before he transferred to Pitt. He just signed a free agent deal with the 49ers. Very good kid, from what I hear. Two of the guys that I coach with have coached him, very close to him, and I'm rooting for that kid. And Kenny Pickett was his trigger man. So rooting for Kenny Pickett. I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers do a lot of very intelligent drafting. If I'm not mistaken, I think Kenny Pickett is an older guy. Also, isn't he 25?
He's 25. He'll be 25 when the season starts.
So, I mean, I don't think he's got a red shirt year, William. He doesn't have a red shirt year. I mean, maybe he loses the battle outright to Trubisky, but I don't know if I'm Kenny Pickett, I don't want to sit here. I want to play right now. I'm 25. Yes,
No, I was just going to say, one other thing that really, stuck out for me, the Lions, they came into this draft process with two, first round picks. And I expected them to take Aiden Hutchinson second overall, which they did. I think, he's going to be a solid player for them. He's not going to be a star, but he can be a solid player. But the other thing for me is they traded up 20 spots from 32 to 12 to take Jamison Williams, a wide receiver who's in the process of recovering from an ACL injury. And like to me, the trade was surprising on like so many fronts because you moved up 20 spots in the first round, and generally that's where we have to see teams, give up an additional first round pick for the following year. That didn't happen with the Vikings. I was surprised on that. And of course, the Vikings being division rivals of the Lions, especially. But I mean, you trade up that much to get a guy who might not be ready to go for you, when the season begins, and might not be able to have the impact that you would hope from a first round pick from day one.
Well, the philosophy there is this kid is so special that you'll wait a year to have him. So it doesn't really matter, what they get from him now because they're looking at the future. And they're not built to win now anyway. So let's just say he doesn't play till next year. By next year, they'll have their new quarterback or what have you. And they're looking at this going forward. I thought he'd get into the bottom of the first round and somebody take him there. But after the run was on the top guys, if you notice, they all went back to back to back. Wilson, Olave, then him. And funny enough, they were all at Ohio State together. I mean, I don't know what they're doing at
Right.
Ohio State, but they're doing something right.
Right.
And you have to make sure that you're building your team. Timing is everything. So what you don't want to have is you don't want to have the quarterback ready before you have the skills. You don't want to have the skills ready before you have the quarterback. And you look at a lot of teams and you'll say, if you could just get this, but if you take it when you see it, then hopefully it hits all at once and then maybe you can get somewhere. That's how I look at it because they need everything.
Was it a surprise for you to see Drake London go as early as he did to the Atlanta Falcons?
Well, when you look at Drake London, what you see is a catch radius. He's like a Mike Evans, body type of guy, contested ball guy. And, they got Kyle Pitts there. They had nobody on the outside to threaten the defense. For me, it's just hard sometimes. I'm not a big 40-time guy, but I still want to watch you run. Not the time, but I want to see how you move, your fluidity, get in and out of your breaks. I like to see kids work out if I'm going to take you in the top 10. But his tape is excellent. He's a really big guy, big time guy, big time talent. And it's just, they had to get more talent on that Atlanta team. And they did the right thing by trading away Matt Ryan, So, but, that was another destination people thought Kenny Pickett could go all Malik Willis. So.
Well, speaking of Malik Willis, do you think that, I personally didn't, but do you feel that, he had the potential to go in the first round?
We talked about this stuff even when we did last year's draft, and I say this every time I talk about quarterbacks. For the most part, you do have outliers in this statement I'm about to make. Accuracy is natural. You are looking for a naturally accurate thrower of the football. You do not want someone trying to be accurate because that's when you get all over the place throws, stuff like that. You want the naturally accurate throws of the football. Does he have a ridiculous arm? Yes, but he's more like, Josh Allen, who went 10 and had a 58% completion percentage. And what happened when he got to the Bills, it didn't change much till he got Stephon Diggs. So now Stephon Diggs makes you look good because A, he's always going to be open. B, he's going to catch it no matter where you put it. Is he always accurate? No. I don't think much has changed with him. He's gotten a little bit better, but I'm not drafting a guy like Malik Willis in my first round. Third round, I thought was a little terrible. I thought he was a second rounder, but I wouldn't have drafted him in the third round. I actually preferred the other quarterbacks ahead of him. I preferred Ritter, I preferred Matt Corral, and I preferred Pickett over Willis.
Yeah, I mean, all of the quarterbacks, for the most part, they went where I expected them to go. I mean, you think about Sam Howell. I talked about him earlier with Washington going in the fifth round. He had a great freshman year, and it's like, steadily, it's come down. And of course, North Carolina as a team did not ball out like, a lot of people expected them to in the preseason heading into the 2021 college football season. So he definitely slid. Malik Willis, he's a project, and I think, as is Desmond Ritter, as is Matt Corral. And I see Matt Corral, he's probably going to be a career backup. I could probably say the same for Desmond Ritter. The eyes are going to be on Malik Willis, whether or not, the Titans are, going to give him the opportunity to be a starter. And I say when I give the opportunity, I mean, Like, are they going to be entrenched on him? We'll have to wait and see. But as a third rounder, he's going to have an opportunity to work and come in there, obviously get acclimated with the playbook and go forward. Now, we saw the Jets and Giants actually make a trade during the NFL draft, but nonetheless, we saw some aggressive moves by Jets general manager Joe Douglas. In the attempts to really reshape this roster, taking Sauce Gardner fourth overall, coming back at number 10 and getting Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State, and then trading back into the first round late to take Jermaine Johnson, the edge rusher out of Florida State. And then on top of that, to begin day two, trading up in the second round to take Brees Hall, the running back out of Iowa State. How do you feel that the Jets did this year at the draft?
Jets had a wonderful draft, and for the most part, for the Jets, it was just about talent. They just didn't have a lot of talent on their team. And he just went for the best players that could help them right now. And you look for immediate impact areas, pass rushers that are good when you get them right away, immediate impact. Corners make an immediate impact, because they stopped the other team. They helped to stop the other team. I was kind of shocked he didn't go 3 when Detroit took him, right?
No, no, no.
Well,
Houston took Stingley.
right. The Houston took Stingley. That kid didn't play for a whole year. His tape is up and down. One of the best freshman corners I ever saw in my life. But his tape is ho hum. But the Sauce, that guy can cover, man. He can cover. He's smooth. He's 6'3". It's going to be really interesting to see how Robert Saleh uses these new pieces in his defense. He's got great interior linemen, so it's going to help them. It's going to help them to have these other pieces. Because remember, the Jets really didn't have much of a pass rusher last year. Didn't Quentin Williams lead them in sacks?
Yeah, and I mean, like you think about where Robert Saleh came from as a D coordinator with the 49ers. The 49ers know how to rush the passer. And I mean, of course, we saw that even this past season with D'Amico Ryans as their DC. But nonetheless, the Niners, they rush the passer and they rush the passer with their front four. So that is something that Saleh definitely has to establish for the Jets. But you touched on something that I did want to talk about. I felt that Houston taking Derek Stingley Jr. number 3, I felt that was a reach. For me, I look at it, I'm with you. He had a phenomenal freshman season. Granted, LSU as a team, the talent around him declined in each of the last 2 seasons. I mean, you look at just overall from that team that won the national championship a few years ago from LSU, and you look at how many guys have gone on to be first round picks in the National Football League on both sides of the ball. It's phenomenal. But nonetheless, Stingley was not the same guy after that, because you figure for his sophomore year, all of those teams that he faced, they now had a year's worth of game tape on him to see what he could and could not do. The secondary was not as strong around him as well. And then, of course, he had the injury early on this past season, and he just shut it down, to get ready for the NFL draft. To me, I definitely thought Stingley was a first round talent. I just thought it was a bit of a reach by the Houston Texans to take him third overall. I also thought it was a reach for the Texans to take Kenyon Green, the guard out of Texas A&M, number 15. The Texans had a lot of needs, and they still do, because they are a talent depleted team, and this is not going to be a quick fix in trying to reshape that roster. But nonetheless, when you're drafting that early in the first round and you have multiple picks, you really cannot afford to have reaches. And I think both of those picks for Houston were definitely reaches.
And they were in the same position as the Jets. They had multiple first round picks, same as the Jets. And you look at the 2 drafts and you're like, well, that's good. And this is, I don't even know what to call it. And that's how you have to look at what the Houston Texans did with those 2 picks, those high picks, a 3 and a 15, you come away with a corner and a guard.
Listen, you very rarely, you really don't see guards take it that high. I mean, if you see a guard going in the first round, he's usually someplace between like 25 to 32. You know what I'm saying? And it's generally, if you see a guard taken there, it's because, okay, a team pushes a panic button because they say, hey, you know what? Somebody might come up in front of us and get this guy, so let's get him now. But at 15, I think that was a huge reach for the Texans.
it's a bit of a luxury pick. Let's just say your team is already ready to go. You got your quarterback in place. You got your running back in place. And all you need is that one more lineman to fill in the blanks. All right, take that guard at 15. Not when you have absolutely nothing on your team. You have nothing anywhere, right? You're gonna roll with Davis Mills, right? So you're not gonna have um, you're not gonna have a top line quarterback. No one was worthy of the third pick at QB. Okay, I understand that. But go get this kid some weapons. Who's he throwing the ball to?
Yeah.
You drafted a corner at 3. You had to pick up all of the best wide receivers.
Yeah. And for me, sticking in that division, to me, another team who missed the mark, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. They took Trayvon Walker first overall. And then, they came back, they traded up with Tampa to take Devin Lloyd. And I like the Devin Lloyd pick. But my biggest problem for Jacksonville was this. Trevor Lawrence took a beating last year as far as how many times he got sacked, how many times he was literally running for his life. And Jacksonville failed to address their offensive line. And I think that was a very big thing for me. Like in my first mock draft, I had them taking Evan Neal out of Alabama. Why? Because you know what? You need somebody to protect the blind side of your quarterback. And I said it last year. Trevor Lawrence is the right player. He just went to the wrong organization. And I think this move right here is only going to add to that because you've invested so much in this guy, but again, you're not putting the pieces around him.
So when the report started circulating that Jacksonville was in love with Trayvon Walker out of Georgia with the first pick, I said, I hope this is fake. I hope they don't do this because to me, you really can't. You really can't. Well, you can because they did it, but you really should not overlook the lack of production from someone if you're going to take them with the first pick. There's no way I'm going to take a guy with the first pick that plays defensive end that had 9 sacks in 4 years or 3 years he played.
Right.
There's no way I'm doing that. I don't care what his measurables are. There's a hole in his game that you need to assess. And you can't tell me that you watched a film of all this guy, all these snaps, and said he's better than Aiden Hutchinson. I'm sorry. There's no way you can convince me that he's better than Kayvon Thibodeau. He's not even better at rushing the passer than the kid from Michigan that got hurt that Baltimore. Joe. Yeah.
David Ajabu.
Yeah. That's another steal he got because he ended up in Baltimore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Second round.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Anyway, he's not even better at rushing the passer than that kid. When I'm taking someone first overall, I want to be scared when they snap the ball. And this guy doesn't do that. I don't care what he ran. I don't care what his measurables are. Yeah, he tested like Jadeveon Clowney, and even he didn't get a bunch of sacks in the NFL. It's not something that I would have done with the first pick. That could have been leveraged into something else, especially when you knew you wanted to take this guy. He would have been there at 5 or 6.
Definitely. I mean,
that's part of the reason why a lot of guys fell because they didn't take the right guy. Whenever that happens in a draft, whenever somebody goes on a turn, so to speak, and takes somebody that's not really that good, you see a Cal Hamilton at 13. You see these receivers get all the way down to the 10 spot. Like you see that happen when you take a guy that should be taken back there. Now, Trayvon Walker at 13, sure, no problem. Trayvon Walker at 1, that is a big no. And I went back to the Devin Lloyd thing. I love Devin Lloyd. I think he was the best middle linebacker, inside linebacker in his draft. Then the Kobe Dean. He is going to be special. But again, it's all about fit. And also, let's not forget they did sign Cam Robinson right before the draft, and that's why they didn't take a left tackle. But who's to say you can't have 2 good tackles?
Listen. You sign Cam Robinson. That's all well and good. But you take an Evan Neal, you take a Charles Cross, you take an Ikem Ekwonu, and you put them at right tackle, and at least now you anchor your offensive line on both sides and you give Trevor Lawrence more protection. This kid was running for his life last year. And, to your point, this is why some teams mess up in the draft and some teams continue to hit because teams like Baltimore this year, obviously they took Kyle Hamilton at number 14, but typically Baltimore and Pittsburgh, they're usually picking in the 20s, because they're playoff teams. And nonetheless, they generally tend to find guys who should have gone much higher that end up falling to them at their respective spots. And even with the New York Football Giants, that worked out in their favor this year because Kayvon Thibodeau should have been gone by number 5. And I think it was very interesting what Joe Shane did because Carolina, right after the Giants took an offensive lineman. Okay, they took Ikem Ekwonu. But the thing was, Joe Shane said, "Hey, you know what? I'm still going to take my pass rusher first, even though it was a strong possibility that Thibodeau could have still been there at number 7. Who's to say that a team wouldn't have traded up to number 6 if the Giants had taken the offensive tackle at number 5 and gotten Thibodeau? So Joe Shane says, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to take this guy at number 5." Then, of course, Carolina takes Ikem Ekwonu at number 6, and then the Giants get Evan Neal at number 7. And for my money, I felt that Evan Neal was the best offensive tackle coming into this class. And that's not a slight to Charles Cross. It's not a slight to Ekwanu. I just thought Evan Neal was a little bit better. And I haven't been saying this a lot for the Giants in recent years, but definitely in the first round, I think they found some impact players. I know that there are some people who I've talked to personally. They're questioning the Wandale Robinson pick in the second round. I'm like, you know what? He can play. The bottom line is you just have to have a quarterback to get him the football. It's not going to be Daniel Jones, but nonetheless, Wandale Robinson can play. But definitely with Thibodeau and Neal in the first round, I think the Giants definitely struck it big.
So let's talk about the Giants draft. So my, from what I got by just paying attention to what happened there, I think they felt like Thibodeau was going to be gone, right? And they were comfortable taking Ekwonu or Neal. You get what I'm saying? So you take what you can't get later, because then the next best guy is, let's just say, Jermaine Johnson, who the Jets took at the end of round 1. That was a big fall for him. The kid's got a lot of talent. But the drop off between Ekwonu and Neal, and then Charles Cross is big. I ended up watching a lot of offensive line stuff this year because the Raiders needed a tackle. So I did a lot of tape on the offensive line. And we needed a wide receiver. I did a lot of wide receiver tape. I did a lot of watching of these guys and paying attention to them and just doing my own assessment. The Giants won no matter what at that point. Why? It all boils down to somebody picking out a turn. So Trayvon Walker gets picked 1. Now let's reverse it. Let's just say Aiden Hutchinson, right? Goes 1, right? Let's just say Detroit, like, Dak, we need another pass rusher. They take Thibodeau at 2. Now you get to 5, and it's Walker there. Do you take Walker at 5? Probably not. Y'all might take the lineman, and then the whole rest of the draft is different because one team picked out a turn. Now, let's go to this Wandale Robinson thing. Because when it popped up on the screen, I was like, now? I thought the kid was a 3rd-round pick. He has talent. You are correct. I didn't think he was a 2nd-round pick. But there's a few guys that went after him. But I'm only going to talk about one because when I started watching him, I was like, damn, this guy plays like Steve Smith. Then Steve Smith comes on TV and goes, damn, this guy plays like me. Sky Moore, that went to the Kansas City Chiefs. This guy. Listen, I'm not happy about it because he's in my division now. This guy's going to be really good. He catches everything. He's only 5'9" also. Wandale's a small guy too. But he catches everything. He goes up in the air. He's just a good all-around wide receiver. He does everything. He does everything well. And if the Giants wanted a wide receiver, I couldn't understand why it's kind of like the Kadarius Toney pick last year. They took a guy that was more like a boutique kind of like trick pony kind of wide receiver instead of taking a guy that can play wide receiver. And that's my biggest problem with it. It's the only bad pick in the whole draft to me. And not because of the player, because of where you took him.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's like, it's unfortunate because the biggest issue with the Giants, is the quarterback position, and we've talked about that many times in the past, but nonetheless, Giant fans need to understand that this is not going to be a quick fix because Joe Shane really had to start over from the ground up because Dave Gettleman left him a mess, salary cap wise, personnel wise. you name it. So, these are the first building blocks that Joe Shane and Brian Dable are going to have, in order to go forward. But I think, the Giants are hopeful that they finally been able to solidify their offensive line, which has been a weak spot for them. Still a ton of questions at quarterback and running back. Wandale Robinson, it's a good pick if you had a quarterback who can give him the ball. But the problem is with guys like Wandale Robinson and Kadarius Toney, if they're going to get the ball and they're going to have to create space because they don't have a quarterback who can, consistently deliver the football to them down the field. So we're going to have to sit back and wait and see how that happens. You talked about Sky Moore going to Kansas City. I think that was a good pickup for them. He's going to fit into that system. We're playing alongside Patrick Mahomes, and of course Andy Reid, is going to do a phenomenal job in getting him the football. The one thing that I didn't like that Kansas City did, though, and I talked about this yesterday, they went defense heavy, which is fine. But I think they waited a year late to do it because you figure after getting exposed in that Super Bowl loss a couple of years ago to the Bucks, I think a red flag should have gone off and said, "Hey, you know what? We have some issues on D that we need to fix." They didn't, and then of course their defense got torched throughout the season, and then it was a detriment to theirs in the AFC Championship game loss to the Cincinnati Bengals, and now we've seen a lot of personnel that was on the Chiefs team that helped them win the Super Bowl no longer be there, led by Tyreek Hill. But nonetheless, you get a quality pass rusher like George Karlaftis coming out of Purdue, early on in this draft. I think it's a big time impact for the Kansas City Chiefs going forward, along with the cornerback that they drafted out of Washington.
McDuffie and Karlaftis are decent players, solid players. I don't think they change anything this year. Karlaftis is more of a base end, not really a pass rusher. He's like an old school 4-3 defensive end, or even a 5 tech out of the 3-4. He's a really big, strong guy, not a real twitchy guy. He can play in the run game, stuff like that, but don't expect big sack numbers out of him. And McDuffie can play, but they're going to lose Tyrann Mathieu. Is he going to replace Tyrann Mathieu with all his, the slot cornerback stuff? I don't know. But McDuffie's a tough guy. He comes up, he tackles, and he's just feisty. He's a feisty guy. But in my mind, those guys are both reaches. That was like need drafting, you know?
Well, for me, and I want to, definitely want to finish up with you on the Raiders, but a couple of things I want to hit on before that. Number one, we did not see any players from the University of Texas get drafted. Second time in the NFL draft history that that's happened, and no Longhorns were selected. I have my thoughts about that. I've shared my thoughts yesterday on this podcast about that. What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't even watched them this year to know how much talent is actually on that team, but it does sound very strange for a university with that rich tradition of just having talent every year, year in year out, and then for only to have happened twice in the history of the NFL draft, and this league is over 100 years old. It says something about the organization and what they've done over time, but it also says that they need to do a better job recruiting, and they got to get someone in there that can recruit. They had Charlie Cross there for a while, and he left, and I don't know what they're doing now, but they got to do something at the University of Texas, because that's just unacceptable. When you got these small school kids and people all putting 2 and 3 kids in the draft last couple of years, and you have none for this year.
Well, for me, the biggest thing is this, for so many years, the University of Texas, they could just get their pick as far as who they wanted, from the Lone Star State to come play football for them. It was Texas against everybody else. But the dynamic has changed. I mean, we see how teams from the SEC West, such as Auburn, such as Alabama, such as LSU, and then of course Texas A&M, have consistently been able to recruit Texas successfully in recent years. And for A&M, it's not something that just started with Jimbo Fisher. It was there with Mike Sherman and Kevin Sumlin as well. And now Jimbo has taken what those guys are doing, and he's taken it to another level in regards to recruiting from the state of Texas. We've seen Pac-12 schools such as Oregon in recent years have success coming down to the state of Texas and getting quality high school talent to come out of there. So I know that the Longhorns have Steve Sarkisian running the show right now, but and you know Sark has always been a heck of a recruiter, whether he was at USC or at the University of Washington, and now of course Texas. So he's got to find a way to put that put a blanket over the state and get back to what Texas was known for, because we talk about LSU being DBU, but you think about some of the great DBs that Texas put in the NFL, consistently, the likes of Quentin Jammer, the likes of Nathan Vasher, the likes of Aaron Ross, the likes of Earl Thomas. Okay, then you think about the running back position and what it meant to Texas for so long. Ricky Williams, Cedric Benson, Jamal Charles. You think about the wide receiver position as well with the likes of Roy Williams. You think about the linebackers and the edge rushers that consistently came out of Texas and the defensive linemen. A lot of people, you probably remember this, but you go back to the mid to late 1990s. Okay, at one point on the Texas Longhorns defensive line, you had Sean Rogers and Casey Hampton together at defensive tackle. Now, I don't know about you and I, but I'm like, listen, if you played middle linebacker behind those two guys, you probably would have easily had 8 or 9 tackles a game and been, first team all Big 12, because they opened things up. Texas has gotten away from that, and that's something they have to get back to.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Sarkisian being there is going to attract the quarterback. Someone is going to want to learn what he knows from the quarterback position, throwing the football. He's one of the best at it from the time he was the OC at USC. I remember when he was at Washington, throwing for 500 yards a game. It's just something he knows. So what you will see from them immediately is a good quarterback or someone that has talent that he can coach up to be really effective at throwing the football there at UT. So, but I don't know about those two big old D tackles, man. Sean Rogers might have been like 360 or something like that. He was an enormous dude, bro.
Listen, that was
he was big.
That was 700 pounds a man right there between the two of them. But to your point, very quickly with Sark, you think about him at UW, he got Jake Locker, who went on to be a first round pick by the Titans, and then of course he was the one who got Sam Darnold to come to USC as well, another first round pick. So obviously he knows what he's doing. But also 9 players, and I said 8 yesterday by mistake, but it was actually 9. 9 players from the University of Cincinnati were drafted this year. And to me, that's very big for that program, a non-power 5 school, that made the college football playoff, of course. And I think this is only going to help their transition to the Big 12 soon. And then, of course, Luke Fickell, an Ohio State guy who was coaching in Cincinnati. And you think about the state of Ohio, as good as the Buckeyes are, they can't get everybody, within that great state that has a great high school football tradition to stay there and play ball. So, for Luke Fickell to find those guys, some guys that were overlooked, and he knows how to coach them up. Also, getting quality guys from Pennsylvania, another state that has a rich football tradition, as well as Kentucky, which is right to the south of Cincinnati. I think this is big for this program going forward.
Those Cincinnati kids, I rooted for them because I watched them play, and I just wanted to see someone else come into the college football playoffs and do something. And so Cincinnati there was a breath of fresh air, but they looked totally overmatched in the game that they played versus Alabama. But they all got drafted because the team had a good year. They all were good, and then all of those guys tested good. The kid Alec Pierce, he ran sub 4.4. He's 6'3", he's 220. Had a 40-something. I think he had a 41-inch vert. Tested off the charts, Well, so they had to pay attention. He didn't go out there and run a 4.7 and like, oh, all right, he's Cincinnati wide receiver. He doesn't matter. I'm going to go take somebody on the bench from
Okay, looks like we lost Dennis there for a minute. He was rolling. He had some technical difficulties. Hopefully he will be able to rejoin us very soon. But nonetheless, it was a very, very impressive weekend for the Cincinnati Bearcats. And if you are a fan of this program, if you're an alum of this program, if you're a current player on this program, you have to be proud with what you saw as this Bearcat club. They went out there and they balled all season long, and the rewards came up for them this weekend at the draft. And while I got you here, Dennis, just one final thought, and this is how I wanted to finish. How were your thoughts on what the silver and black were able to do this weekend at the draft?
Well, we drafted Devontae Adams. So um, this was a bit new for me. The Raiders haven't traded their draft picks. Well, not new but old since Al Davis was alive. You hadn't seen them trade their first round pick. We traded the first and the second. I love the draft so much, and it kind of sort of took away a little bit of my
Juice.
excitement.
Hmm.
Yeah, took how much we love the draft roll, man. I used to buy the Sport News publication before the internet, to look at players and make sure I knew who we were drafting. And it's exciting. It's like getting, a gift on Christmas for your team. And, to know we got Devontae Adams is a great, consolation prize, man. But, we went out there, we drafted the nose tackle out of LSU. This guy's a monster. We drafted another D tackle. And he seems to have a lot of twitchiness. I think when you have picks that late, I think you draft talent. And I think that's what we did. And it's just, we took I really like the Zamir White pick. I think he's going to help. I thought the Raiders didn't have a physical runner. So Josh Jacobs is a big back, but he's not necessarily the physical runner. If you go back and look, they always have a physical runner in New England. So they took Zamir White, big guy, 220 pounds, just at 6 feet, whatever. He runs 4.4. He's not dodging you. He's not getting out of your way. He's going to hit the gap. And when you get in there, you're going to eat some shoulder pads, and he's going to come back and do it again the next down. So I think they wanted to just get somebody to help impose their will, on teams. I just think a little bit more of the New England Patriots thought process is going to go into these drafts, and they did an interview after, and Josh McDaniels said the Raiders fans should get used to this.
Mhm. Well, I mean, New England guys, they have their way of doing stuff. I mean, Bill Belichick, he stuck to, what he usually does. He uses a first round pick on a guy that nobody outside of the building for the Patriots, was even thinking about. But you know what? It was successful for so many years because, he had Tom Brady. Let's see how he's going to transition to that, going long term with a guy like Mac Jones. But nonetheless, overall, a very entertaining draft. It was very interesting to see a lot of these proceedings, a lot of trades. And then, of course, in my memory, I really didn't see a year recently where we had so many teams having multiple picks in the first round. Remember, at one point, Philadelphia had 3 first round picks and they traded one of those to New Orleans. So that's definitely going to be something going forward, as the Eagles have more draft capital. And that's a credit to Howie Roseman. Once Howie Roseman got back into that front office, things began to change for the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's definitely something to look at going forward. And, let's see how things, pan out for these rookies heading into, the rookie camps, and then, of course, training camp, and then, of course, the regular season. But as we're getting ready to wrap up here, and I always talk about this, and I always, give you the opportunity to show some love to somebody. So, Mr. Ward, the floor is yours.
Hey man, my guys have started their spring season, and man, it's football. We having 2 games a weekend. We just had 2 wins last couple of days. Shout out to my kids, man. Brooklyn Chiefs, 12U, and we have a really good 11U as well. Our 13U, which was 12U last year, really good, man. We're doing extremely well right now, and this is going to be a very good year for us. I hope you get a chance to come out and see these kids in person. Well, you will not believe what they can do, man. You would not believe these kids, man. You would. I'm trust me. I got linemen almost as big as you, man. You won't believe me till you get there. I'm telling you.
Well, as always, man, it's a pleasure, and I always appreciate your time. You and I have been doing this for years. So it's like, what, it seems like a second nature, but, nonetheless, it's always a pleasure to have you on here, man.
Always my pleasure, man. And anytime you want to do this, just send me a text. Bro.
Definitely, man, definitely. And for all you fine folks out there, want to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Want to thank, Coach Ward once again for chiming in and giving a lot of insight in regards to the 2022 NFL draft. If you like what you heard and saw, please feel free to hit the like button as well as subscribing to this channel. And if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out. Drop a line to be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So for Coach Ward, my name is William Martin, and I'm signing off. Saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day. And thanks for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube.